In the summer of 1980, the atmosphere inside California's famous Long Beach Arena was unlike anything a martial arts fan could have hoped for. More than 3,000 spectators had packed every available seat, filling the arena from the front rows to the highest section as they waited for the heavyweight final of the International Karate Championships. This wasn't just another tournament on the calendar. It was one of the most respected karate events in the world, and for many people in attendance, it carried an even deeper meaning. Years earlier, this very arena had witnessed the rise of a young American fighter named Chuck Norris, whose remarkable performances during the 1960s had helped establish him as one of the greatest karate competitors of his generation. Although those competitive days were now behind him, his reputation still commanded enormous respect. Chuck wasn't there as a participant that afternoon. At 40 years old, the six-time world champion had been retired from tournament competition for nearly 6 years. Dressed in a navy sport coat, gray slacks, and polished dress shoes, he sat quietly in the front row with the calm confidence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything inside a ring. Before the championship match began, the announcer introduced him to the crowd. Instantly, thousands of fans broke into applause, honoring the man whose achievements had inspired countless martial artists across America. Chuck responded the same way he always did, with a modest nod and a faint smile, before settling back into his seat to watch the final unfold. Nothing about his expression suggested he expected to become part of the day's biggest story. As the audience focused on the championship bout, nobody inside Long Beach Arena had the slightest idea that they were only minutes away from witnessing an unforgettable moment. The referees concentrated on their responsibilities, photographers adjusted their cameras, and tournament officials prepared for what they believed would be an ordinary trophy presentation. Unknown to everyone present, the fighter about to win the heavyweight title had absolutely no intention of ending the afternoon with a simple handshake and a photograph. Instead, he was preparing to challenge one of the biggest names in martial arts history in front of every person inside the building. The man at the center of that moment was Dolph Lundgren. At only 22 years old, the Swedish fighter already possessed an intimidating reputation throughout Europe. Standing 6 feet 5 inches tall and weighing roughly 245 pounds, he combined exceptional athleticism with relentless full-contact experience. As the reigning European Kyokushin champion, Dolph had gone undefeated for 2 consecutive years, defeating experienced opponents with remarkable consistency. Among everyone competing that day, there was little doubt that he looked like the most physically imposing athlete in the arena. Powerful, disciplined, and overflowing with confidence, he carried himself like someone who believed there wasn't another fighter alive capable of matching him. Dolph had arrived in California representing the Swedish Karate Federation only a few months after winning the European Championship in Budapest. His success hadn't come by accident. Since his early teenage years, he had dedicated his life to intense Kyokushin training, combining countless hours inside the dojo with demanding strength workouts that gave him extraordinary speed and explosive power despite his massive frame. Even the way he spoke reflected that confidence. His Swedish accent remained unmistakable, but every sentence carried the certainty of someone who had spent years proving himself against elite competition. From his seat in the front row, Chuck Norris watched the young champion throughout the day with the same composed expression he displayed during every martial arts event. He wasn't impressed easily, nor was he distracted by hype. He simply observed as the tournament progressed. Dolph's performances quickly justified everything people had heard about him. One by one, opponents entered the ring hoping to slow the towering European champion, and one by one they walked away defeated. His opening matches ended decisively, but it was the semi-final that truly changed the atmosphere inside the arena. Standing across from him was a respected 230-pound Tang Soo Do fighter from Houston, a competitor many believed possessed the experience and power necessary to push Dolph into a difficult contest. Instead, the fight barely had time to begin. Only 19 seconds after the referee started the action, Dolph unleashed a perfectly timed roundhouse kick that crashed into his opponent with frightening force. Spectators sitting close to the ring later claimed they actually heard the impact before they fully understood what had happened. The Houston fighter collapsed instantly, forcing his corner team to carry him away while the crowd fell into an uneasy silence. It wasn't the silence of disappointment. It was the silence that naturally follows when thousands of people witness something so sudden and so violent that cheering almost feels inappropriate. The championship final placed Dolph against another accomplished Kyokushin practitioner, Mike Stone Jr. of San Diego, the only remaining heavyweight who had also advanced through the tournament without losing a single round. Many expected the final to become the toughest fight of the day. Instead, Dolph controlled the contest almost from the opening exchange. His pressure never eased, his timing remained precise, and after only 1 minute and 40 seconds the referee stopped the fight following yet another devastating knockout. The audience applauded respectfully as Dolph was declared the new heavyweight champion, but there was something noticeably different about the atmosphere. Instead of the loud celebration usually heard after a championship victory, many spectators remained unusually quiet, still processing the overwhelming dominance they had just witnessed. Moments later, legendary martial arts pioneer Ed Parker stepped onto the competition floor carrying the championship trophy. The polished chrome reflected the bright arena lights as photographers moved closer, preparing for the traditional victory pictures. Everything appeared completely routine. Parker presented the trophy, Dolph accepted it, and tournament officials expected the new champion to bow respectfully before leaving the mat. That was how these ceremonies always ended, except this time they didn't. Instead of stepping away from the spotlight, Dolph remained standing at the center of the mat. He made no attempt to pose for photographers, nor did he acknowledge the officials waiting to escort him off the competition floor. For a brief moment, everyone assumed he was simply catching his breath after another exhausting fight. Then, without asking for permission, he reached toward the announcer's table, picked up the microphone, and turned back toward the audience. Almost instantly, the atmosphere inside Long Beach Arena changed. It wasn't because anyone knew what Dolph intended to say. It was because everyone understood that tournament champions simply didn't do things like this. The ceremony followed a familiar routine. The winner accepted the trophy, thanked the organizers, bowed to the crowd, and left the mat so the next event could begin. There was no tradition of victory speeches, no public debates, and certainly no unexpected challenges. The simple fact that Dolph was still standing in the middle of the competition area with a microphone in his hand was enough to make more than 3,000 spectators lean forward in anticipation. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Dolph thanked Ed Parker for organizing such a respected championship. He expressed his appreciation to the Swedish Karate Federation for supporting his journey to the United States, and thanked the American hosts for welcoming him into the competition. His opening remarks sounded exactly like the kind of speech everyone expected from a newly crowned champion. The crowd listened politely, photographers continued taking pictures, and officials began to relax. Then his tone changed. After a brief pause, Dolph shifted the conversation away from the tournament itself and began speaking about the differences between European and American karate. He explained that the system he had grown up competing in demanded continuous full-contact fighting, where every exchange tested endurance, timing, and genuine toughness. According to him, there were no pauses after every clean strike, no opportunities to reset after a single point had been awarded, and no dependence on referees to separate competitors every few seconds. In his view, real combat continued until one fighter clearly proved he deserved to win. He then admitted that after spending several days watching karate tournaments across America, he had reached a disappointing conclusion. What he had witnessed, he said, looked completely different from the full-contact fighting he knew back home. He described it as point karate, where touching an opponent often mattered more than truly controlling a fight. Fighters scored, stopped, reset, and repeated the process again. To Dolph, that wasn't the kind of martial arts competition he respected. It isn't fighting, he explained calmly. It's point scoring, it's controlled, it's almost like choreography. A quiet wave of murmurs immediately spread throughout the arena. Nobody started booing. Nobody interrupted him. Instead, thousands of spectators exchanged confused glances as they slowly realized this speech was becoming something far more controversial than a simple victory celebration. Dolph wasn't criticizing a single match or one particular fighter. He was questioning an entire style of American karate in front of the very people who had dedicated their lives to it. Once he sensed that he had everyone's attention, he continued. He acknowledged that America had produced many famous martial artists over the years. Several champions had earned worldwide recognition, and one name in particular had become larger than the sport itself. Chuck Norris. Dolph paused deliberately after saying the name. He admitted that he knew Chuck's accomplishments: 6 world championships, a respected martial artist, an actor whose popularity continued growing with every new film. He even mentioned watching one of Chuck's recent movies before traveling to the United States, complimenting the action sequences while quietly reminding everyone that cinema and competition were two completely different worlds. Movies are entertainment, he said, but movies aren't fights. Then came another pause, And winning point tournaments isn't the same as proving yourself in full contact combat. By now the entire arena had fallen silent. Even the photographers stopped moving. Every person inside Long Beach Arena sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen. Slowly, Dolph turned away from the audience. He wasn't searching for anyone. He already knew exactly where his eyes needed to go. His gaze settled on the front row, where Chuck Norris continued sitting exactly as he had throughout the afternoon, calm, relaxed, completely expressionless. Then Dolph lifted one arm and pointed directly toward him. The gesture alone was enough to send another ripple through the crowd. Officials immediately looked toward Chuck. So did the cameras. Within seconds, thousands of eyes followed Dolph's finger until every spectator inside the building was looking at the same man, Chuck Norris. Without lowering the microphone, Dolph spoke loudly enough for every corner of the arena to hear. "Chuck Norris, you're here today, and so am I. I've just won this championship. I'm 22 years old. I'm the European full-contact champion, and I honestly don't believe you could survive a single round against me." The words echoed through the arena like a challenge no one expected to hear. Then Dolph smiled slightly before adding one final sentence. "I'll even make it easier for you. 3 minutes. Come down here and show these 3,000 people what American karate is really capable of." For a split second, the entire arena seemed frozen in time. No applause, no boos, no conversations, just complete silence. It was the kind of silence that only appears when thousands of people realize they are witnessing something that will be talked about for years. Tournament director Ed Parker immediately stepped forward, clearly realizing the event had slipped far beyond the carefully planned schedule. At the same moment, Bob Wall, who was seated beside Chuck Norris, leaned closer and quietly whispered something into Chuck's ear. Television cameras that had only seconds earlier been focused on the champion instantly turned toward the front row, hoping to capture the reaction everyone wanted to see. Every spectator waited for the same question. Would Chuck Norris ignore the challenge, or would the retired legend stand up and answer it? Chuck Norris didn't move, not immediately. From where he sat in the front row, his posture remained exactly the same as it had been throughout the entire afternoon. One hand rested casually on his knee while the other remained folded across his lap. His face revealed nothing, no anger, no amusement, no embarrassment, only patience. To many people in the audience, that silence was almost more intimidating than any response could have been, because everyone knew Chuck Norris had spent years competing against the toughest karate fighters in the world. He had heard insults before. He had faced doubters before. Yet he had never been known as a man who reacted emotionally. The camera zoomed closer. Photographers abandoned the championship podium entirely and surrounded the front row seating area. Ed Parker raised one hand, hoping to calm the increasingly restless audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began into another microphone, "let's remember this is a tournament ceremony." His words barely carried across the arena before they disappeared beneath the growing wave of whispers spreading through the crowd. Every spectator wanted the same thing. Would Chuck stand up? Bob Wall glanced toward his longtime friend. "You don't have to answer him," he said quietly. Chuck's eyes never left Dolph. "I know," he replied calmly. There wasn't the slightest hint of irritation in his voice. If anything, he sounded thoughtful. Across the competition floor, Dolph continued waiting confidently, the championship trophy resting at his feet while the microphone remained in his hand. The young Swede looked completely convinced that he had placed the American legend in an impossible position. If Chuck refused, people would wonder why. If he accepted, he would have to fight a man nearly 20 years younger, considerably larger, and fresh off 3 devastating knockout victories. From Dolph's confident smile widened. For the first time that afternoon, the two men looked directly at one another, separated by only 30 feet, separated by 2 generations of karate, separated by 2 completely different philosophies of fighting. Chuck adjusted the front of his sport coat before taking a few slow steps toward the edge of the competition area. Every camera followed him. He didn't hurry. He didn't march. He simply walked with the relaxed confidence of someone completely comfortable in the spotlight. When he reached the edge of the mat, Ed Parker stepped between them. Chuck Parker spoke quietly enough that only those nearby could hear. "We don't have to do this." Chuck smiled. "I know." Then he looked at Dolph. "You've had a good tournament." Dolph nodded once. "I have. You fought well." "I did." Chuck folded his arms. "And now you want more." "I didn't travel halfway around the world for easy victories. A few people in the audience applauded. Others remained silent. Chuck tilted his head slightly. "Tell me something." Dolph waited. "When was the last time you watched someone retire?" The question seemed unexpected. "I'm not interested in retirement." Chuck nodded. "I wasn't either." A faint smile crossed his face. "Until I realized something, the smartest fighters aren't the ones who never lose. They're the ones who know exactly when they've already proven enough." The arena became quiet again. Dolph answered almost immediately. "That sounds like an excuse." Several gasps echoed through the audience. Chuck merely smiled. "It might, but someday you'll understand." The young champion shook his head. "I don't think so." Chuck looked directly into his eyes. "How old are you?" 22. "I was about your age when people started telling me I had something to prove." He paused. "So I proved it. I fought. I won. I lost. I learned. And eventually I stopped needing strangers to tell me whether I was good enough." Those words seemed to linger in the air. For the first time since taking the microphone, Dolph didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied Chuck carefully. The calmness, the confidence, the complete absence of ego. It wasn't the reaction he had expected. Most champions would have become angry. Some would have accepted the challenge immediately. Others would have shouted back. Chuck had done none of those things. He simply stood there, completely in control. Ed Parker finally stepped closer again. "I think that's enough for today." But Dolph wasn't ready to let the moment end. He raised the microphone once more. "So you're refusing?" Chuck looked toward him. "No." Another pause. "I'm choosing." The distinction confused much of the audience. Chuck continued. "There's a difference. I retired 6 years ago. I've honored that decision every single day. I don't step back into competition because someone asks loudly enough." Another wave of applause swept through the arena. Dolph remained unconvinced. "People will say you're afraid." Chuck laughed softly. "They've been saying that since 1968. The audience laughed with him. And somehow, Chuck continued, "I still sleep just fine." Even Dolph couldn't hide a slight grin. For a moment, the tension eased. But only briefly. The young Swede lowered the microphone. "So that's it. No fight." Chuck nodded. "No fight." Disappointment spread across sections of the crowd. Some fans had secretly hoped they were about to witness one of the greatest exhibition matches in martial arts history. Instead, they were getting something entirely different. Chuck took another step closer. Close enough now that only a few feet separated the two men. "If I were still competing," he stopped. "Maybe today would have been interesting." Those few words immediately reignited the audience. Cheers erupted. Even Dolph raised an eyebrow. "But I'm not." Chuck extended one hand. "And because I'm not, I'm going to congratulate you. You earned that trophy. You earned everyone's respect. But respect can disappear faster than championships." Dolph looked down at the offered handshake. The arena waited. Seconds passed. 1, 2, 3. Finally, he reached forward. Their hands met firmly in the center of the mat. The audience exploded into the loudest applause of the entire afternoon. Flashbulbs lit the arena like lightning. Photographers rushed closer, desperate to capture the historic image. Two champions. 2 generations. 1 handshake. Ed Parker finally smiled with visible relief. Whatever disaster he had feared, it had been avoided. Chuck released the handshake but kept speaking quietly enough that only Dolph could hear. "You've got incredible talent." Dolph listened. "Don't waste it trying to fight yesterday." The young champion frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Chuck glanced toward the audience. "Every generation wants to beat the last one. It's natural, but eventually, you'll have your own generation chasing you." The words landed differently this time. Not as criticism.
As experience?
Chuck gave him one final pat on the shoulder. "I hope you're ready for that day." Without another word, he turned around. The crowd immediately stood once again. This time, the applause wasn't simply for a 6-time world champion. It was for the way he had handled a moment that could easily have become chaos. As Chuck returned toward the front row, Bob Wall smiled. "I thought for a second you were actually going to take off that jacket." Chuck laughed. "So did I." The audience heard the comment through nearby microphones and laughed along. Back at center mat, Dolph remained standing with the championship trophy in one hand. For the first time all afternoon, he appeared thoughtful. The confidence was still there, the pride remained, but something else had entered his expression. Perspective. Years later, many people who claimed they had attended that championship would remember the event differently. Some insisted Chuck had accepted, Others swore the two men had sparred behind closed doors after the tournament ended. A few even claimed Dolph had apologized publicly before leaving California. Stories grew larger with every retelling. Facts blended with legend, rumors became memories, and memories slowly transformed into martial arts folklore. Whether any private conversation ever happened afterward remained known only to the people who were actually there, but everyone agreed on one thing. The afternoon had produced a moment no one expected, not because punches were thrown, not because someone was knocked out, but because two champions had stood face to face with thousands watching and proved that sometimes the strongest statement isn't made with a kick or a punch. Sometimes it's made by knowing exactly when not to throw one.